Alrighty, so for our next presenter, we have a teacher from Portland, Oregon, who has the privilege of working with students from all over the world. Miss Beth Ronk is an English teacher, so just go ahead and give her a round of applause, please.
Good afternoon. I'd like to begin by asking you some thinking questions, as teachers often do. Thank you. Think about what you value the most in your community or neighborhood. What makes your community thrive? And then I would like you to think about how you would respond if that aspect of your community was threatened to be taken away. What actions would you take? In this time that we have, I'd like you to keep those thoughts in mind as I share one story of an asylum seeker, followed by the recent factors that have made seeking asylum more challenging. Wendy's story. The Mazapa River in Pahuilas, Honduras, is the primary source of clean water for drinking and bathing. In 2017, the river's existence was threatened by the construction of a hydroelectric dam, which didn't even have proper approval from the community. In response, community members held months of peaceful protest. Construction began on the dam anyway. The water quality immediately diminished. Then in August of 2017, as tensions grew stronger, police and military, including a US-backed force team, tear-gassed, beat, and arrested several of the protesters for protecting their water and life. Among those arrested was a woman named Wendy. Following her release, Wendy received more threats of violence and no longer felt safe in her community. She feared what would happen to her children if something happened to her. So she made the difficult decision that all asylum seekers have to make, and she left with her 2-year-old son, Oscar, in February 2018. She'd heard that if she joined a caravan, that it would be safer and make it easier for her to enter the US to seek asylum. In the middle of their journey, the caravan stopped in Zapachula, Mexico, for nearly a month. There she began to have doubts as she saw other people turn back, and she didn't want her son to suffer. She wasn't sure she was making the right decision. But then Wendy was able to meet with volunteer lawyers, and they told her she had a very strong case for asylum. So she decided they should keep going. At the end of March, they moved on and rode La Bestia and other trains north through Mexico. 1 month later, they finally arrived in Tijuana. She and her son waited a week before they could request asylum. They were then detained, which she says was the worst part of the journey. She stayed with around 50 other women and children in the icebox, as it's called. She watched mothers being separated from their children, and she thanks God that this didn't happen to her. They stayed nearly 2 weeks in detention, were released, and ultimately arrived to Portland through a sponsor in June. Then Wendy began to fully realize how complicated it is to apply for asylum. She had trouble securing a lawyer and learned that she had to wait to get a work permit. But now, 6 months later, she's working with the Innovation Law Lab and submitted her application last week. She's been on parole since San Diego and needs to regularly check in with ICE. She showed me her ankle bracelet, which she's had on since last May. She joked that she's thankful she has the new type that doesn't need to be plugged in every few hours, but she's looking forward to having it removed next month. I asked her what she would share with those who don't understand her journey. She told me that a lot of people can only imagine what she and others have experienced in their home countries, but they don't live there. They don't really understand what it's really like. And she didn't realize this process would be so complicated. But now her main focus is to begin working to provide for her children and her children's future. Wendy's story is just one of so many of asylum seekers. So what's happening to the thousands of other asylum seekers? For the past several decades, politicians and entire administrations have created policies designed to deter migrants from coming to the border to request asylum. These types of policies are not new under Trump, but the current administration has created bolder and more restrictive policies in addition to increasing border militarization. The asylum rejection rate, as Kathy mentioned, has climbed from 44% 6 years ago to about 70% rejection today. I'd like to briefly share two recent policies that have shaped how migrants seek asylum: the so-called asylum ban and the migrant protection protocols. On November 9th of last year, Trump issued an executive order known as the Asylum Ban that blocked migrants from requesting asylum if they entered the U.S. between ports of entry. As we heard from Kathy, there are no designated places one needs to request asylum. Thankfully, a federal judge quickly blocked the order, and in December, the Supreme Court upheld that decision. Trump extended the order on February 8th, but the court's ruling ultimately overrides this extension for now. Even though this ban is illegal, there are cases that have been witnessed in which asylum seekers are told to travel to official ports of entry miles away and have been told they cannot apply on such and such day, and they need to come back. As of last week, for example, in Nogales, only one person per day was being processed. The newest Trump policy is called the Migrant Protection Protocols, or MPP, effective January 28th. MPP's goal is to send asylum seekers back to Mexico and wait, no matter where they enter, even though it's unsafe. This policy is in practice in Tijuana, with threats to expand to other cities like El Paso. So far, it's unclear who's being returned and for what reason, but families are now being affected. On Thursday, the ACLU and SPLC filed a lawsuit against the administration, claiming MPP violates Immigration and Nationality Act and other human rights laws. The effects of these policies on those seeking asylum are many, but in my opinion, the effect with the most weight is the fact that these new policies have caused migrants to seek out more dangerous routes into the U.S. The combination of increased militarization, lengthy wait times, restrictions on when and where one can request asylum is forcing more migrants through more remote geographic territories like the Sonoran Desert. More migrants died along the southern border in 2017 than 2016. Thousands of people are